And we should be live. Welcome everyone. I'm just gonna give it a minute until I can see the numbers. We are live from London, where it's nearly 9 p.m. UK time. If anyone was completely new to me, if you've just clicked on this video by accident, if you're watching the live, you've got about 10 minutes to wait until it's officially time to start. And if you are watching us on a replay in the next few days or weeks or months, feel free to skip the next 10 minutes. We're just waiting for everyone to connect. And here I see you. Hi, Michelle. Welcome, everyone. Let me know in the chat if you can hear me properly. Sound on picture, okay, says Tish. Perfect, Tish. Thank you. Now it's starting again. No, man, I thought that was fixed. It worked perfectly in my room the other day. This shouldn't... That's weird. I'm gonna have to swap gimbals, guys. Apologies, this shouldn't be... See, it's all moving. Right, bear with me. I'm just gonna put you down. That's so odd, because technically it's still under warranty, but if it's happening only when it's warm, then if I take it to the shop, it's not gonna happen. Anyway, bear with me. I've got a spare one. It is broken as well, but at least on this one, it's the third axe that's broken. It's not as important as the first one. So you might want to close your eyes for a sec. How? Hold on, yeah. That's going to be tricky. Right. All right, apologies about that. Close your eyes, because it's going to make you dizzy. I'm still here. I'm just removing the gimbal to put you in another one. Bear with me one sec. I don't understand how this is possible. I tried it. Uh-oh. Right. We should be good. Bear with me. Apologies about the... if any of you are watching the replay in the next few weeks or months, feel free to skip the next few minutes. Right. This one should be fine. Oh, I'm very disappointed because it seemed to be fine in my room the other day. Some of you might remember this one basically overheat in Marseille. When I finished the live, actually it's burning right now. Yeah, this axis there was completely burning, far worse than now. Oh well, I'll try to see if I can use the warranty, because technically it's still under warranty. And that one will do for today. The gimbal I've got just now, it's the third axe that's a bit damaged, but we don't really need the third axe. We'll just be careful. Welcome everyone that just joined. Apologies, I've not been paying much attention to the chat because I've been dealing with gimbal issues. Now we should be all sorted with plan B. Hopefully. You missed the live in France. Well, you can always watch the replay. It's available on YouTube. Although it was not the steadiest of videos because of gimbal overheating. Hi Cheryl, welcome everyone that just joined. So we've got a few minutes before to start. And welcome Samantha. Let me see what time it is. 6 minutes to go, guys, 6 minutes. If anyone was completely new to me, I'm Natalie, you're very welcome. Do say hello in the chat. It's always great to see a few new names. Just gonna check that I've not dropped anything on the floor. No, we're good. And nice to see you, Matthew. Nice to see all of you. Let me flip the camera around. I'll show you a little glimpse of the view. I am in Bleeding Heart Yard. No, I'm not too hot, Susan. It's getting a bit better now. It was very hot earlier this afternoon, but it's getting a little bit chillier now. Hi Luna, nice to have you live from Oregon. Cheryl, I'm not sure what the temperature is now. It's probably still about 30 degrees, but it's not over 30 like it was earlier today. So that's in Celsius. I don't know how much that'll be in Fahrenheit. Maybe in the 80s? I don't know. Don't want to say anything wrong. Right, let's see what time it is. We've got 5 minutes to go, guys. 5 minutes. So for any of you that would be completely new to me and you don't know what's happening, we're doing a little live walk around Smithfield. So I'm gonna take you live along the streets and I'll tell you about stuff that interests me, mainly dark history. It is nearly 9 p.m, yes, and it's still bright. Love this time of the year. And welcome, Pam. Right, one thing we haven't done is to test the microphone. Most of you know the drill already. I've got this microphone here, but I've got a couple of connections, so I've got to check that it is indeed plugged in properly. So what we'll do is I'll tap the microphone 3 times, and you tell me in the chat whether you've heard it. 1, 2, 3. Let me know in the chat that you've heard a little tapping. And if at any point through the tour you start hearing some wind noises that should not happen, let me know in the chat. That could be that the microphone got disconnected. Am I going away again with my sister? No, I'm not going anywhere with my sister, not for now at least. I was just there in south of France for a wedding. Hi Jane, and welcome everyone. Welcome Cynthia. Welcome everyone that just joined. You've heard it, perfect. Thank you very much, Luna. So don't be shy. If at any point through the tour you hear some wind, you let me know. What are the praying skeleton on my shirt? It's a brand. It's what is it called? Resurrection? No. You might be able to see. Hold on. No, I don't know how to show you the label. It's a brand. Not that I bought it. We have, where I live, you know, I've got 49 flatmates because I live in a former nursing home. So we've got this little charity rack. When someone doesn't want any of their items of clothing anymore, we put them on the rack so they're not wasted. You want to see the logo again? There it is. It looks like I'm showing you my boobs, but yeah, it's. I want to say resurrection, but it's something about death. But I'll have to check the label when I take it off, and I'll tell you on Facebook or something. Oh, that's great to hear, Sunsun. Nice to have you back, Lynn. I might be able to see all them. It's finishes with O-N. Now I can see. I think it's resurrection, which is quite on topic today because we will talk about the resurrectionist later on. Right, let me check what time it is. 1 minute to go. One minute before we officially get started. Oh, religion. Okay. It does finish by on, so that's probably the brand. It does ring a bell, yeah, Religion of London, so that must be what it is. I don't know why I've made up Resurrection. I probably prefer Resurrection of London. That'd be great. That'll be a cool name. Religion is not bad either. Did you do a Google image search or? And welcome, Dessa. You are on time for once. Well done. Perfect timing. Let me check. Yes, it is officially time to go. So welcome everyone. Welcome to Bleeding Heart Yard. Without further ado, I'm gonna flip this camera around and let's go. So I'm in a lovely little yard that is clearly full of former warehouses. You can tell because of those, you still have a few of the cranes. And nowadays, you don't have much here apart from some kind of a bistro or French wine bar. But it's an interesting name, Bleeding Heart Yard. It's probably only named after an old pub that was here at the beginning of the 16th century that was called the Bleeding Heart of Our Lady. You know, before the Reformation, pubs often had very Catholic names. And then after Henry VIII broke up with the Catholic Church, a lot of the pubs have rebranded, you know, if they were called the Ark, suddenly they'll call themselves the Ship. I'll show you the name of the yard up there, Bleeding Heart. But because of such a name and quite a cool atmosphere as well, and those, you know, those old cobbles on the floor, it has led to a few urban myths about the name. Probably not true. I mean, we don't know if any of them are true, but probably not. There's probably no true story of murder here. But there are two little urban myths about a murder in Bleeding Heart Yard. The first one, it's that they actually both date back to the same time, to the late 16th century. Before the yard was actually designed, because it was designed in the 17th century. But the first one would be about Elizabeth. Well, no, actually, the most famous one is the one with Alice Hatton. She was allegedly the wife of Sir Christopher Hatton in Elizabethan times. And she dared to ask the devil for a little favor. And so she basically asked the devil if he could help her husband getting a favor from Queen Elizabeth I. The devil agreed, and Sir Christopher Hatton got a little favor from the Queen. He actually bought a lot of land around here. Then they had a little housewarming, and Alice, she forgot to invite the devil, when it's actually thanks to him that everything happened. So allegedly after that party, when she asked the devil for help, well, she was found dead on the spot, her heart still bleeding. It's a nice story. People still believe today that you can ask the devil for favors. I happen to have been to, don't ask, but I've been for dinner with a priest from the Congo 2 weeks ago. And he told me everything about possessions and exorcism, and he very much still believes that you can ask a favor to the devil. Anyway, so that was the first story. It's a nice story, but Sir Christopher Hatton, he was a lifetime bachelor, so he had no wife that could have done such thing. The other story is another lady Hatton, Elizabeth Hatton, that would have allegedly gone to a party, and at some point she kind of went out with the Spanish ambassador. And it is said that he would have lost it and killed her on the spot, that she was found the next morning with blood all over the place, on her heart still beating. Again, a nice story, but apparently Lady Elizabeth Hatton, she died of illnesses, so she was never murdered. So none of the stories are actually provable, at least. It's probably just the name, you know, that inspired a lot of people to tell interesting tales. The name might be quite familiar to you because it was actually featured in Little Dorrit. I think chapter 12, I think it is. It's actually called Bleeding Heart Yard. There's a couple of families with a dodgy landlord that live there, I think. Anyway, let's cross over to go towards the station, Farringdon Station. And guess what? It is haunted. The station itself, it is said that sometimes people hear moaning from the platforms. I've never heard anything, but some people believe that it might be the ghost of a little girl called Ann Naylor. Now, Anne was, the murder did not happen here. It actually happened on Bruton Street in Mayfair. Some of you might remember we've been there before. If you remember when I did a tour in Mayfair, that was the street where I've shown you a little plaque on the spot where Queen Elizabeth II was born. So that's the street. Very different period of history, though. We are now in the 1700s. At the time, you know, the kids that grew up in the workhouses, they sometimes benefited from an apprenticeship system. So they'll be sent into a business that was run by the parish. So those apprenticeship, the owner of the business would take those kids, teach them a trade, but they'll get some kind of subvention from the parish. You know, at the time the parish was almost like the city council today. You know, they ruled pretty much everything. And poor little Anne, she was in the workhouse. She had been working actually since the age of 10. She had an older sister, and they had been sent into the business of a lady called Sarah Metyard. She was a hatter in Mayfair. So you had Sarah Metyard, the mother, and you had Sarah Metyard, the teenage girl. Her daughter was also called Sarah. Luckily, they called her Sally. So we've got Sarah and Sally Metyard. They were well, you know, those systems of apprenticeship, they were easily abused. Some of you might remember we talked about that when we talked about a case on Fleur de Lys Court, just off Fleet Street. A horrible case of abuse as well. Because, you know, sometimes they'll get the money from the parish to take those girls or those kids, train them, but sometimes they were actually treating them very, very badly. And what happened is that the hatter lady, Sarah Metyard, she took 5 little apprentices to teach them the trade. So she had Anne and her sister. But she was treating them very, very badly. They'll be abused, they'll be beaten, they'll be hardly ever fed. And one night, little Anne tried to escape. She ran off in the middle of the night. She hadn't planned anything. She just couldn't cope anymore. And then she found herself in the streets of Mayfair, and she didn't know where to go. So she approached a milk delivery man, and she was like, "Help me! I've escaped." And the milk guy, he had a job to do, and he didn't know what to do with little Anne. So he told her, "No, you've got to go back, love." And she said, I can't, sir, that'll be the end of me." And he was like, "Okay, then you go back to the workhouse." So little Anne didn't know what to do, so she did go back to the workhouse. But the workhouses, they worked with those apprenticeship businesses, so they actually sent her back to Mrs. Sarah Metyard. And then the abuse got even worse. All the girls were mistreated, but little Anne, we don't know if she suffered from any health conditions or maybe learning difficulties, but she was described as a bit fragile, and she might not have been able to work as hard as the others for one reason or another. And she was terribly treated. She would be attached upstairs, attached to a cabinet, and apparently one day she wasn't moving, so the other girls got a bit worried, and they were like, Mrs. Metyard, Anne is not well, come and see. So Sally, the teenage daughter, Sally Metyard, run up, and she was like, move, or I'll make you move. Then she took her shoe off, she hit the little girl with a shoe, and the little girl was not moving. She probably was already dead at that point. So Mrs. Metyard came up, she sent away the other girls, and then she pretended that little Anne was punished. Very cruel, Samantha. So she was dead at that point, but they did not want to alarm the other girls, so they pretended that little Anne was punished for weeks. They actually brought her food and stuff to pretend that she was punished. At that point, we think her sister knew exactly what was happening, so she escaped, the sister, and she managed to. I mean, we never heard from her again, so she did run off through the night, and the body was still there upstairs, hidden in a cabinet for many weeks, until one night all the girls went back to their families to spend Christmas Eve. And that's when Sally and Sarah Metyard decided it must be time to get rid of the body. They cut her into pieces. They had tried to put one of her hands in the fire, but the smell was so bad that they actually stopped. And they decided to take the body here. They took the body here at the spot where the station is today, and there was a place called Cheek Lane. They put the body in the sewer. Look, the cheesemonger or whatever it is, they are named after me. Nadbut. Anyway, sadly, the body was found, but would you believe the coroner decided not to investigate? What happened is we're very close to St. Bart's Hospital. When you had some students in medicine that were doing some dissections, so they imagined that it was just the anatomist that got rid of some body parts that they had used in the dissections. So the story was not investigated for many years. Look at the donor character. I think he's heavily inspired by my Uncle Richie Pennybag. It looks like the Monopoly Man, doesn't it? Oh, yeah. There's another one on the side. On the side, he's got some glasses. Uncle Richie Pennybag doesn't have any glasses, but look, it still looks like Monopoly Man. Anyway, back to poor little Anne. So nothing was investigated until a few years later. So what happened is Sally, so the teenage daughter, she actually met a man and she got married and left her mother. After the girls had left, all the apprentices, Sarah Metyard had started to abuse her own daughter. So the daughter had kind of run off with a man, and the daughter and the mother kept arguing. And eventually, they were arguing in front of the new husband. So he had some suspicions, and eventually Sally Metyard confessed everything to him. So he's the one that went to the authorities. That's how they got caught eventually and hanged at Newgate Prison. So that's where we'll finish the tour in a moment. So finally they paid for their crimes. But much later on, luckily they spoke in front of the boyfriend, because otherwise they would have got away with murder or manslaughter. One might argue that it was not voluntary. Anyway, this is the beautiful Smithfield Market. It was a market for many years, a meat market. It was open at night, so it was mainly a wholesaler. All the restaurants and the butchers would come and supply themselves at the market. It has closed a couple of years ago now, and it's very slowly being converted into the Museum of London. That used to be in Barbican. It should be, I think the first part should be opening in 2026. The second part is going to take a couple more years. It's going to be very interesting. It was actually the site of a Roman cemetery, would you believe, before even the meat selling. And in the museum, apparently, they'll have. It's going to be very interesting because as they did the work, they found some Victorian vaults underground that they didn't even know were there. So they're going to incorporate them into the new museum. And also, a few meters below, you have the train line, the Thames Link. The one that goes, it goes from Elephant all the way to King's Cross. And apparently they'll do a see-through wall where you can see the trains going by. So that'll be quite cool as well. And we've got some of those amazing telephone boxes. Those telephone boxes, they are listed, so they're part of our heritage. That's sad for the meat market, Disa says. Yeah, but they still exist. They've been moved to Dagenham. And it's going to be better for them because here we are inside of the congestion charge zone. So they always had to be gone by 7 a.m. to avoid paying that. That's what happened to the Covent Garden market. It went down to Vauxhall. The fish market went down to towards the Dockland as well. So eventually they all have to kind of move out of central London. It was amazing that the Smithfield Market was still here, to be honest, after so many years. And it's probably going to be quite weird for some of the businesses around though, because some of the pubs and stuff, they were opening at 5 a.m. because of course some of the butchers wanted to go for a drink after work. I'm guessing they all had to change their opening times and stuff. Anyway, in a moment we'll talk about what was happening on the other side of the market, the public executions. But guess what was happening here? It was here that you'd come back in the day if you wanted to sell your wife. Yes, you've heard this right. If you wanted to sell your wife. The practice of wife selling was quite often happening in the country, always in front of the markets. And what happened is, back in the day, it was mission impossible to get a divorce. There were only very few excuses with which you could be granted a divorce. One that could give you a divorce was if the marriage was not consummated. But as you can imagine, that's quite difficult to prove. Some people tried. All across Europe, we had those, what they called impotence trials. Obviously, that was fairly awkward. You'd basically take your wife to court, and you try to perform sexual intercourse in front of the jury. Sometimes they would invite some sex workers and everything to prove that it was not working. So as you can imagine, not many people wanted to go through that. So if you couldn't get a divorce, well, you might as well sell your wife. Now, I know it sounds extremely sexist. What they'll do is that they'll bring their wives, they'll put them in some kind of neck collar or some kind of harness. They'll be parading their wives over here, and then it was an auction. The wife would go to the highest bidder. Now, it sounds very sexist, but actually the wives were very much involved. The highest bidder was very often agreed ahead, and very often there was already the secret lover or not so secret lover of the wife. What they'll do is they'll place an ad in the paper just to make sure people would turn up, because it was a popular event. You know, it didn't happen that often. It was never actually fully legal. That's why they wanted a large audience. That's why they did it in front of the market, because they wanted a lot of witnesses that the sale had actually happened. And yes, the building is listed, this, yeah. And by the way, for those of you that might be watching me for the very first time ever, if you're watching the replay in the next few days or weeks, I know a lot of you watch it without the chat. So if you hear me stuff that sounds very random, that's probably because I'm reacting to something in the chat. Anyway, so yeah, they'll be parading their wives. Very often the price was already agreed ahead anyway. And it happened for decades and even centuries, really. That was very British. It did not happen on the continent. Actually, the French were making fun of the Brits for doing such things. And the last wife being sold, being recorded, because there might be a few more after that, but we've got records of a wife being sold in 1913 in front of the market in Leeds. So not that long ago, would you believe? And before you ask, yes, you could sell your husband. I did do a bit of research, and I did find 5 cases of husbands being sold. But that didn't really make much sense at the time, because, you know, at the time, your husband was sorry, I've missed some things in the chat with codes, but apologies, I've missed something, I think. So yeah, it didn't make much sense to sell your husband, because of course your husband was meant to supply for you. So if you sold your husband, you were gonna lose money at some point down the line, you know. So it was a silly idea, but it's been done. Anyway, for those of you that know your British history, you might know we had a king that wanted to get rid of his wife, King Henry VIII. You've probably heard of the story of Henry and his 6 wives. Just to tell you the beginning, Henry was first married to a Spanish princess, Catherine of Aragon. They actually loved each other very much. They were together for over 20 years. They had a very similar sense of humor. So it was a great marriage, those two, despite the fact that it was an arranged wedding, you know, for a Catholic alliance in Europe. And what happened is Catherine failed to give him a boy. At the time, boys were much more important, you know, for the future of your dynasty. You wanted a boy. Catherine actually had, I think she had 6 children in total, but none of them survived infancy apart from one, Mary. You might have had the cocktail, Bloody Mary. It is named after that one, but no boys. So Henry blamed his wife. They didn't quite know how it worked, you know, in terms of chromosomes. So he wanted a new wife. At the time, you couldn't get a divorce unless the Pope found a good excuse and gave you what they called an annulment. So Henry asked the Pope, and the Pope said no. Oh, I see, Linda, we're still on the devil. Thank you. And yeah, so the Pope said no. So Henry was like, stuff it then, I'll break up with the Pope. So that's how the king broke up with the Catholic Church to create his own church, the Church of England. So he gave himself the title of the head of the church. And the thing is, the building ahead of me there, that's a former monastery, the Charterhouse monastery. And as you can imagine, some of the priests and the Catholic religious heads in general, they were not always massively excited about the idea of breaking up with the Pope. And here in the Charterhouse monastery, the prior, a priest called John Newton, he refused to swear oath to the king. He refused to kneel in front of the king. He refused to go along with the Reformation. And I'm afraid this is what we call high treason. Do we know what we do to the high traitors? They would be hanged, drawn, and quartered. So you'd be dragged behind horses, your head slamming on the pavement. You'd be hanged, but not long enough for you to die. You know, when you were hanged with a short noose, if your neck wasn't broken, often it would take several minutes for you to die. You'd be struggling, gasping for air. And sometimes you'd be lucky. Sometimes you had a friend in the audience that would be able to pull your leg. Apparently that might be the origin of the phrase, pulling a leg. And then you'd be quartered. If you were lucky, you'd be cut. That was the nice way to be quartered. If you were not so lucky, they'll attach one leg to a horse, second leg, second horse, one arm to a third horse, and your fourth limb to another horse. And then they'll tell the 4 horses to go 4 different directions. Now, if that was not enough, poor John, not only was he quartered, but his limbs were nailed to different walls around the country. And one of his arms was nailed to that very wall over here. So they nailed an arm to the wall here to remind everyone not to go against the king. And so that's what happened to the traitors. Now, let me flip this camera around to show you a little piece of art over here. It is from an artist called Alex Schinek. It's potentially the last day. I think it was meant to be here till the end of June. Today is the last day of June. So they'll probably remove it in the next few days. It is called A Week at the Knees. The knees spelled the knees, like in your legs, you know, the knees, the junction. So it's a little pun on A Week at the Knees. It's a facade from a Georgian building, or inspired by Georgian architecture. I can't go through at this time because the square is closed, but you can actually walk through. So it's quite cool. You can see the windows and the door and the little latch on the door and all that. The artist, you might be familiar with some of his work. He's done some twisted letter boxes or noted telephone boxes or zipped up walls. And I really like what he does. He does very out of the ordinary sculptures, very much urban sculptures. Anyway, this is the beautiful Charterhouse Square. It's a lovely little piece of green. They've got a little pop-up bar. They're doing some evenings openings in the summer. But I'm sure some of you might remember this little square holds a grisly past. Do you remember what it used to be? What's hiding under the grass? Hi Herbie, and welcome everyone that just joined. Do we remember what's hiding under the grass over here? Oops, apologies, my gimbal is not working best, but it's broken as well. I hope I'm not gonna have to buy a new one. Exactly, a plague pit. So we didn't actually know for many years. We didn't know until 2014, really. For many years, it had been rumored to have been a plague pit, but we didn't know for sure. What happened is in 2014, they did some excavation. You know, they actually dug 40 meters below for the Crossrail project. So that's the Elizabeth line. And For the ones that don't know, by the way, the plague pits, they were those improvised graveyards. You know, when the plague struck, half of London died, almost. So those little graveyards were completely saturated. They had to improvise some burial grounds. So they were known as plague pits. This one, for many years, they believed it had been a plague pit. People knew, you know, collective memory and stuff. Actually, when there was a school in the Charterhouse at some point, the school has been moved now. It's now in Godalming in Surrey. But at some point, some of the bigger kids, they used to grab the little kids and stick their heads to the ground to force them to listen to the voices of the people that might have been buried alive. And eventually, yeah, when they dug up in 2014 for the new Elizabeth line, they found a lot of skeletons. They found a lot of bodies. And they indeed found some traces of the bacteria Yersinia pestis. So that's indeed the plague bacteria. So it was definitely a plague pit. And you know what's the weirdest thing they found, or the most peculiar thing they found? As they discovered all those bodies, so they were from the 14th century plague, they found 2 skeletons of men. They appeared to be in their early 40s, not related. The 2 skeletons seemed to be holding hands. That was weird. The skeletons, by the way, they were fairly well placed. You know, in the documentaries, sometimes we see like they come with carts with a lot of dead bodies and they just dump them in the pits. Apparently that didn't happen. They took care of them. They always placed them facing God, you know, on their back. So they didn't really dump them. They would still try to give them a decent burial. So those 2 bodies were holding hands. That's very peculiar. I mean, you know, it might have been a gay couple. They might have asked to be buried that way. But to be honest, in the 14th century, that's actually quite odd. Or maybe they did get buried alive, or one of them at least. And maybe as they realized they were going to die anyway, the last thing they could do was to grab each other's hand. Who knows? We'll probably never know. The fear of being buried alive, that was actually a proper phobia. There's actually a term for it. It's called tapophobia. That is the fear of being buried alive. Today we're not really that scared because, of course, medicine has evolved so dramatically that it's fairly unlikely that that one gets buried alive. I mean, it would have to be a huge medical error. But back in the day, it has happened. I mean, we have, through excavations, we have found some skeletons, I mean, some coffins with scratch marks inside. You know, it was rare, but, you know, it has happened. And actually quite a few famous people were so worried that they made arrangement to have their bodies damaged to make sure they didn't wake up. Like some of you might remember, do you remember when we went to see a very specific mausoleum in Mortlake? You know, the one with a little window where you can see the coffins. That was from Richard Francis Burton, the guy that translated the Kama Sutra. Even if you don't remember, it doesn't matter. His wife, Lady Isabella Burton, she had actually asked for her jugular veins to be cut off after she passed, just to make sure she wouldn't wake up in her coffin. Because apparently she was a very strong Catholic at the time, and apparently she was sometimes going into some kind of trance, and she was worried that they might think she's dead and bury her. So she had asked for her veins to be cut. And some even said that that's why, you know, the mausoleum, you have a little, if you don't remember, I should take you back there one day. You know, there's a little ladder at the back. So I climbed up the ladder to show you the inside of the mausoleum. Apparently it's because she was scared that she'd wake up. So she wanted to be able to come out using the ladder. So that's quite an interesting fear. And the Victorians, they even had come up with a system with a little rope that was linked to a bell. So if you woke up in your coffin, well, for those that had the money to have those services, but if you woke up in your coffin, you could pull the rope and ring the bell. Some say it might be the origin of the phrase "dead ringer." Some even say that that's also the origin of the phrase "saved by the bell." Personally, I don't buy it, because in French we say "saved by the gong," so I think it refers to the bells or the gongs at the end of a boxing match, but who knows. Oh, you remember when I climbed up the ladder? Cool. If you don't remember, there's a little, for those of you that don't, there's a little short in my shorts where I filmed the grave as well. Yes, Tishy was a fascinating guy. Anyway, so this is the new station, the Farringdon station, but on the Elizabeth line, the new tube line we mentioned earlier. That's the one they were digging up for when they found all the bodies from the plague pit. Anyway, let's go and see a little graveyard. Now, if any of you have been to Edinburgh or Scotland, you might have heard of Burke-on-Hare. Burke-on-Hare, they were infamous so-called body snatchers, although they had never snatched a body in their life. Those of you that follow my tours quite often, you probably know already about the body snatchers. Thank you. They were those men that were going at night into the cemeteries and the graveyards to steal the newly buried bodies, to sell them to the anatomist. Because at the time, of course, the anatomists, they wanted bodies. There was a great demand for human bodies. And at the time, the only bodies that were given to science were the bodies from the executions. In the 1700s, there were quite a few, because you had like 200 crimes that could be punished by death. But in early 19th century, you had far fewer. Exactly, Caroline, the resurrection men, as they liked to be called. So, and of course, there were some bodies that were hardly ever hanged, you know, like pregnant ladies or kids. Luckily, they were rarely hanged. It has happened, but luckily that was rare. So those bodies were very valuable. So you had those resurrection men going to the cemetery to steal the bodies and sell them to the anatomist. Now, Burke-on-Hare, they decided that the best way to get a fresh body was not even to steal the body, but just to kill people instead and then pretend to have stolen them. And when Burke-on-Hare got caught in Scotland, they inspired the London Burkers. The London Burkers, they were a gang of body snatchers in London that decided to do exactly that. So they decided to stop stealing bodies and started to kill people instead. They'll be smart about it though. They'll only target people that wouldn't be missed, or at least that wouldn't be missed locally. So they targeted foreigners, for example, or people that came from further away. What they'll do is they'll get them into a pub to get them drunk. And this very pub here, the Rising Sun, was one of those pubs. So that's one of the pubs where they targeted their victims. So they'll get them very drunk, and then eventually they'll take them to their back garden where they'll drown them into a little well. Exactly, murder for science, says Rose. You know, nowadays, if anyone was drowned, the anatomists, they'll very quickly figure it out because you'll have water into your lungs. But at the time, they were not that evolved yet. So they didn't notice, you know, the anatomist. So the London Burkers, they actually did that quite a lot with many victims. And they got caught eventually with the case of Carlo Ferrari. He was a young Italian boy, 14 years old. Again, Italian, so his family might be away. They might not miss him, or at least They wouldn't know where to look for him. What happened is very often the body snatchers, they would actually remove the teeth, because the teeth would be, they'll be sold to the dentist to make dentures. Yeah, I know. I wouldn't want a denture with a dead body. They often refer, it looks like we might have to, okay, right. It's telling me it's better, so I'm just gonna stay here until you tell me we are back. Let me know in the chat when you can hear me. It's telling me that it's better now. Let me know. I'm gonna wait before to say anything of great interest. Let me know if we are back. According to the system, we are. Let me know in the chat. I do apologize. I've been running around trying to find a better signal. It's the system is telling me it's fine now. Can you hear me and see me properly? Let me know in the chat. Oh, maybe not. The system is telling me it's okay, but I don't get anything in the chat. I might have to keep moving. Okay, I'll just completely get out of the graveyard. Yes, we are back. Okay, perfect. Lovely. Cool. So I'm gonna try to stay here for the time being. You thought I was body snatched. No, I'm still here. I'm still here. Okay, apologies about the cut, guys. I'll try to get back to what I was saying. So we were talking about the little Carlo Ferrari. So we were talking about a poor Italian boy that was murdered. What happened is the body snatchers, they took Carlo from a pub, the Rising Sun. So they took little Carlo, they got him drunk, they got him killed. But before to sell his body to Guy's Hospital, they removed his teeth. Because with those teeth, they'll make dentures. The thing is, when you have a body that has been buried a couple of days, if you steal him from the grave, you remove the teeth, it's not gonna bleed. But when you remove the teeth from a boy that has just been killed, then you get bleeding in the mouth. All the anatomists, they knew, everyone knew, because you know when they were at the time, Pam, yes, it didn't matter at the time. You could go to the pub as a teenager. Sometimes they'd even send the kids to buy the drink and bring it over. Anyway, so yeah, they removed his teeth. You know, they did that a lot with the soldiers. That's why they called them the Waterloo teeth. Because on the French soldiers, they removed their teeth to sell them to the dentist. They did the same. So when they took little Carlo Ferrari to Guy's Hospital, the anatomists were a little bit suspicious because he had a lot of blood in his mouth. So they pretended to go and fetch the money to pay the Burkers, the London Burkers, when they actually went to fetch the authorities. That's how they got caught, and they were hanged at Newgate, where we'll finish in a moment. So with an audience of 40,000 people. So that was a great, that was almost like entertainment at the time, the executions. Anyway, we are now in front of a beautiful church. I'll show you the church. Apologies, I can't show you any of the graveyard today because the gods of the internet are not with me. So I'm just gonna stand here in front of the church. So this is St. Bartholomew the Great. It dates back to 1123. So that's one of the oldest churches in the city of London. I bet most of you have seen the inside of the church because it's been used as a filming location for many movies. You've seen it in 4 Weddings and a Funeral, Shakespeare's in Love, Robin Hood, Snow White, Elizabeth the Golden Age, what else? The Other Boleyn Girl, what's love got to do with it? In some of the films, it's not even a church. It just looks so medieval inside that they actually make it pass for another background. Napoleon, Mary and George. So there's a long list of movies that they filmed inside. It's the gentleman that had it built. His name was Hair. He was at the court of Henry I, and he's actually buried inside, and he's still very much haunting the building today. The story of the haunting, what happened is that in the 18th century, they did some refurbishment into the church, and allegedly, it is said that the tomb of Hair was disturbed. It was partially destroyed, and some of the workmen, as a joke, so you could still see, although the body is 900 years old, I mean, it would be 800 at the time, or 700 at the time, the skeleton was still there, and he still had his sandals. And it is said that the little workman actually snatched one of the feet. He actually stole the sandals with the bones as a joke. But apparently he was cursed after that. He felt absolutely terrible. He was ill, everyone in his family was ill, so he brought back the sandal, and he told the priest, he was like, oh, I've taken it as a joke, but a big mistake. So he brought the sandal back, but some of the bones got lost. So it is said that since Victorian times, the ghost of Hair is sometimes seen in the church looking for his feet, his foot, because it's only one. Yeah, I know. What type of joke is that? Stealing somebody's shoe. I mean, some dead people's sandal. But those Victorians, they had a weird sense of humor. Anyway. Talking about the Victorian, I know this story is called London Way of Death, but for a moment, let me tell you about the Victorian way of death. Apologies, I'm not going to move much for the next few minutes because I don't want to lose you again, but I'll show you the church again. The Victorians, I don't want to say that for them grieving was any easier, but it was much more often. Because, when you were a mother in Victorian times, you might have 11 kids. You might lose 6 with typhus or cholera or whatever it might be, scarlatina, whatever. So you'd have to be grieving much more often. And what happened is, when you had a dead in your family, often you'd put them in the death room. Would you believe that's the very room that today we call the living room? At the time, they used to refer to it as the death room, because that's where they'll expose the dead for a week or so before to bury them. And in the death room, people would come and pay their last respect to their loved ones. Sometimes they'll bake some funeral cookies to send with the invite, or funeral biscuits. They'll invite people to the funeral. Obviously, you dress in black. As a widow, you dress in black for 2 years. As a gentleman, that was only for 2 weeks. Go figure. And then if they had money, they would hire some mourning ladies. Those mourning ladies, they were ladies that were paid to follow the coffin. Oh, thanks ever so much, Linda. That's greatly appreciated, those tips. It's thanks to your generosity that I can, keep going. So yeah, they'll have those professional mourners, those ladies that were paid to follow the coffin, and they'll cry and cry and cry for a loved one that they had never loved, they had never known. What about the smelling? Well, I suppose they would bury them before it starts smelling too much, but you'd have to remember that in Victorian times, everything smelled anyway. I mean, I think if we could go back in time, what would shock us the most, it's the smells. I mean, the streets were smelly, the homes were smelly because of the chamber pots and all that. So it was probably not as annoying as it would be for us today. And anyway, sometimes, in those few days before to bury them, sometimes they would take a post-mortem photography. Now, I know it sounds very odd for us today, because today we have a lot of photographs. If I was to die today, you'd have tons of pictures of me on my Facebook. So you wouldn't need to take a picture of my dead body. But back in Victorian times, photography was very expensive, you know. You might take a photo at your wedding, then you might take a family portrait a few years later if you had the money to do so. So when you lost a little one, for example, well, you didn't have a photo of them, so it kind of made sense to want to take a last picture before to bury them. So let me show you a few examples of Victorian post-mortem photography. Little disclaimer, I'm about to show you pictures of people that might be dead. So if you are a bit sensitive, you might wanna, well, close your eyes for a sec. So here on the left-hand side, it's quite obvious. So the little girl on the floor, she's dead, and all the family is gathering around her. The one to the right, I'm a bit more spectacle, but I'll tell you about that later on. Let me show you some more. Over here, it's so on the you've got an infant, a dead infant with daddy, and a dead infant with mummy. The one with the three ladies, that's a bit different. It's actually mummy that's passed, and the little girls posing with their dead mummy. It still happens today, yes, Samantha. In some countries, they still do. I've got a friend from Poland that says that sometimes they still do that. Yeah. Let me show you some more. And this one here, so on the right-hand side, the gentleman is clearly passed. You know, you can see his dates and everything. On the right, the one on the right-hand side, left-hand side, sorry. You see the girl in the middle. She's very clear. She's very much into focus because she doesn't move. She's dead. The two people on the side, they're a bit blurred because they're breathing. You know, at the time, photography was a very long exposure. So you'd be breathing and you'd move, and then you might get a bit blurred. Now, let me remove this one, and I'll show you one more. That's interesting as well. On the right-hand side, it's quite a classic one with the lady, the little girl with the dolls, you know, posing with the dolls. On the left-hand side, that's when it gets interesting. Often, the dead ones, they actually had their eyes closed on the picture. But what they'll do is they'll develop the picture, and then on the developed photograph, they would paint the eyes open. Sometimes it looked very good. Sometimes it looked a little bit creepy. Now, let me show you a last one. Just so you know, I've decided to show you a few pictures that were actually featured in a BBC article, because usually the BBC is fairly reputable as a newspaper. According to the BBC journalist, the little girl on the left-hand side here, she's passed. She's being held with some kind of hooks at the back. I have to say, I am not convinced. You know, sometimes after my tours, some people like to do a bit more research. If you end up researching Victorian post-mortem photography, be very careful what you look at, or memento mori, they sometimes call it, because there's a lot of crap on the internet. There are a lot of people that would take any Victorian photos and they'll tell you, this one is dead, this one is dead, this one is dead. To be fair, sometimes you see some kind of metal hooks behind their shoulders and stuff. It's not because they are dead. It's because photography was such a long exposure that sometimes they put themselves on some kind of holder to make sure they didn't move. If you ask a mortician, there's actually a mortician I sometimes follow on YouTube. Her channel is called Ask a Mortician. She'll tell you it's very difficult to stand a corpse. So I think there are a lot of fake on the internet. There are a lot of wannabe journalists or bloggers or YouTubers that would take any random photo and tell you they're dead. So be careful what you look at. Anyway, let me flip this camera around and let's go. Hopefully the signal will stick with us. So those little graveyards, I didn't even show you, but see the level on which I am now, the level of the entrance, it's about 1.5 meters down Oh, sorry, it's camera struggling to focus here. It's about 1.5 meters down from the level of the graveyard. The graveyard that I couldn't show you because of the signal, so the ghost probably didn't want to be on camera today. It's because of the number of bodies buried there. Those little graveyards around the churches in the city, they were saturated. They just gonna wait. There's a group going through. They, in Victorian times, or in early 19th century, even before Queen Victoria, with the Industrial Revolution, between 1800 and 1840, the population of London had doubled, and then it doubled again, because a lot of people moved into the capital, for the Industrial Revolution, and those little graveyards couldn't cope, because of course people moved into the capital and then they died into the capital. So those little graveyards were completely saturated. The grave diggers were paid by the foot, the deeper the better. And eventually they had to stop burying more people, because, apologies, this is a bit disgusting, but those dead bodies, they create some kind of juices. Those juices would seep into the ground and contaminate the water sources we used to drink. So they had to stop burying those people around those little churchyards. That's when they started to create those amazing garden cemeteries on the outskirts of the city, or what was then the outskirts of the city. So Tower Hamlets, West Norwood, Highgate, some of those cemeteries you've seen in my tours, they were buried because of that. But the thing is, people didn't want to go. People were scared of going to get buried so far away from their local parish churches. They didn't want to go. So they needed influencers. The influencers of the time, that was the royals. So the first one to accept to be buried in Kensal Green Cemetery, that was the Duke of Sussex, one of the many sons of George III. All his siblings were buried at Windsor, but no, he went into one of those garden cemeteries so people would follow. His little sister Sophia also followed, and then you had Jon Snow, and you had quite a few influential people, and suddenly it was okay. After 1852, anyway, you had to. You were not allowed to be buried in those little graveyards in the city anymore, after the Burial Act. Anyway, we are now on the other side of the market, and I'm sure some of you remember what happened on this side. Executions. There also was a fair, the cloth fair that happened here, a bit like the Mayfair in Mayfair. So that was a big market where you'd come and sell your fabrics and stuff at the end of August. And so in terms of executions, there were different types of executions, depending on your crimes. If your crime was about religion, if you were an heretic, you might be burned. If you were a normal criminal, you might be hanged. And if you were a high traitor, as we mentioned earlier, you might be hanged, drawn, and quartered. And that's what happened to a gentleman over here, a gentleman you may have heard of under the name Mel Gibson with a wig, or Braveheart, if you've seen the movie in the 90s. This is Sir William Wallace. William Wallace, I'm not going to go into great details into the reason why he was executed, because we've got a slightly different version of history between Scotland and England. For the Scots, Wallace killed the signal. Oh, I think we better now. I'll just wait until you tell me in the chat, but I think we should be better now according to the system. So yeah, Wallace was first chopped off from his manhood, his willy. That was to show that he was not worthy of having any descendant. I'm back, perfect. Thank you, Pauline. Thank you, Tish. He would be then hanged, but not enough for him to die. Then he'll be quartered. But first, they would have opened his guts to remove his guts and burn them in front of him. So he could have been still alive for a few seconds or a few minutes. So quite a horrible way to go, really. And that would have been, would you believe, on the day of the opening of the fair. So you'd come and buy a bit of wool or a bit of silk and witness a horrific execution at the same time. That was entertainment at the time. Anyway, let me show you the statue of another interesting character standing proudly here. Oh, hold on. Oh, sorry, I had an insect on my face. I don't know what it was. I don't want to know. They're gone now. Some kind of a spider or something. Anyway. This is Henry VIII. We don't have many statues of Henry we don't have any others in London, but I think we've got a couple in Canterbury. But that's the only statues of King Henry VIII I can think of. King Henry VIII, you probably know him because of all his wives and all that. Little less known fact about King Henry, he's the first monarch to allow 4 bodies a year to be given to the anatomist for the dissections. Before that, with the Catholics, you know, the body was sacred. We didn't do that, so he's the first one to do that. By the way, this is the entrance of St. Bartholomew's Hospital, private hospital, 900 years old hospital. It was also opened by Rahir, the priest that we mentioned earlier, that's looking for his foot. Anyway, so yeah, Henry allowed 4 bodies a year to be given for the dissections. It was far from enough, but it was already a start. Because, you know, before that, we didn't give the bodies because, you know, at the time they believed that if their bodies were not buried properly, they would not be able to reach heaven. Yes, Hauker, we are really live. It is 10 p.m. and it's still a little bit bright. Yes, exactly. It's the best time of the year to do the lives. So if you are in the chat, you are indeed watching me live. Now, those bodies given, it kind of made sense at the time to give the bodies from the executions because they believed that if they were not buried properly, they wouldn't be able to reach heaven. But those people being hanged, they were not going to go to heaven anyway, would they? Because they were criminals. So it was not enough, but it was already a start. And of course, at St. Bart Hospital, you know, that's one of the places where they'll do some kind of anatomy lessons, because you know they had to learn. I mean, when I go to a surgeon today, I'm very glad they've got the knowledge they have. So, you know, those bodies were very useful. Anyway, let's go on Cock Lane. I know it always makes people smile. So let me show you the Golden Boy of Pie Corner. The Golden Boy, he actually used to be called the Fat Boy of Pie Corner. They've changed the name because of political correctness. And let me flip around so you can see the Golden Boy. With the Golden Boy, the story behind it is that he was placed here to celebrate the very spot where the Great Fire of London finished. You know, the Great Fire of 1666. At the time, they didn't believe that catastrophes could just happen. They believed that catastrophes were punishment, that God was punishing you for something. And because the Great Fire of London started at Pudding Lane was almost like a street food street at the time, with a lot of bakers and roasting chicken and pigs or whatever. So it started at Pudding Lane and it finished here at Pie Corner. So people were convinced that they were being punished for gluttony. So that's why they had a Fat Boy to remember that. It used to be placed on a pub. At the time it wasn't in this little building, it was on a pub called the Fortune of War. Remember that pub because we'll talk about it again in a second. Now, let me show you Cock Lane. Cock Lane, I think I've got a picture of what it would have looked like at the time. There we go. So this is Cock Lane back in the day. You can see the golden boy of Pie Corner in the corner. Now, we don't know for sure why it's been called Cock Lane, but there was a bit of prostitution at the time of the fair. A lot of the sex workers might have come down this way. Now, there's an interesting hunting story in Cock Lane. It is the story of the scratching fanny of Cock Lane. Now, I know that's very funny on both sides of the Atlantic, because in the UK, when we say fanny, we refer to the female genitalia. But in America, you usually talk about the bum, don't you? So the scratching fanny, it's funny anyhow. It's a story with four main characters, really. You've got Fanny. Fanny was a very popular name at the time. It's actually still a very popular name in France. I'm very lucky I'm not called Fanny, because that'll be quite difficult to wear in the UK. So you've got Fanny and William, they are a couple. So Fanny and Willie, you know it's gonna be a good story when it starts with Fanny and Willie. And actually, you know what, you've got the landlord as well, Richard, so Dick. So you've got Dick, you've got Fanny, you've got Willie. It's gonna be a good story. So you've got Fanny and Willie, they are an interesting couple. What happened is William used to date Fanny's sister. And she died, then he ended up dating Fanny instead. So Fanny was always very worried that the ghost of her sister would come back and that she'd be like, what are you doing with my husband? So Fanny was always scared of ghosts at the first time. And the couple moved here. In this little street, there used to be a lodging house here that belonged to Richard, the landlord. To give you an idea, we are in the 1770s. I think 1772 it was, to be precise. And thank you, Nikki. The thing is, so Willie and Fanny, they moved into the lodging house. That was like almost like a flat share today, you know, when someone would take a lodger and rent a room for a few months or a few weeks or years or whatever it might be, or even a night sometimes. So they moved in here, and there was a bit of an altercation between the boys, so between Willie and Dick, William the tenant and Richard the landlord. What happened is Richard borrowed some money from his tenant, the equivalent of £13,000 today, so that's a large amount of money, you know. And he never gave it back. So the boys were not happy with one another. And at that point, Fanny and the little Elizabeth, so that's the daughter, the landlord's daughter, they started to hear some scratching noises everywhere. And at first they believed maybe it was the ghost of the dead sister. And the little Elizabeth, she could still hear the scratching. And then eventually, Fanny died fairly quickly, smallpox. And then the little Elizabeth, she had a sighting. She saw a ghost, Fanny's ghost. And the ghost told her that she did not die out of smallpox. No, she had been poisoned by arsenic, by your very lover, Willie. Now, because there was a murder claim, they had to investigate. So everyone wanted to come here to see the ghost or to hear the scratching noises. And that was a great promotion for the landlord, because journalists wanted to come and stay. You know, it was the beginning of the press like that, you know, with those scandalous press. And the landlord actually made a lot of money, because everyone wanted to come and stay in the lodging house for a night. And they could hear the scratching noises. Everyone could hear it. Eventually it came out that it was all a fraud. It was the little Elizabeth her dad had told her to go under the furniture to hide and scratch the walls. So for all those months, it was all a fraud. It was the little Elizabeth that was scratching the walls. So there was no ghost. But don't worry, in a minute I'll take you to a place with some real ghost. Or at least we think so. But before we go much further, remember I mentioned the pub, the Fortune of War, that stood right here. Well, the pub apparently was a bit dodgy. They had a room upstairs where they kept the stolen bodies. Because behind me, that is St. Bart's Hospital. So apparently they had, that's where they did the deals, you know, between the body snatchers and the anatomist. They'll keep the body in that room. All the doctors, all they had to do is to cross over to go and inspect those bodies, to check the condition, to check if maybe they were disabled or something. That would be more valuable. And then all they had to do is to find a way to cross over the street with the body. And see this lovely little white building right in the middle of your screen there? That was a watchtower. Because behind it, you've got the church of Saint Sepulchre. So you have a graveyard. When you have a graveyard, what do you have? Fresh body. Fresh body is money. So that's why they had a little watch house. This one is not the original. It has been rebuilt. It was bombed through the Second World War. And there's someone living inside today. But at the time, they had a watchman standing there to check out for the body snatchers. Sadly for the loved ones of the dead bodies, it's that it was a bad job. Very often those guys were a bit drunk. You know, they'll do very long hours, graveyard shift. That might be where the expression came from. And very often they were easily bribed. So very often the anatomist or yes, exactly, Lynn, they would. When they spotted a body crossing over the street there between the pub and the thing, sometimes what they did is they gave him a little bribe and they would just pretend they've not seen anything. Body snatching was an interesting trade because, would you believe, it was not fully illegal. It was quite kind of a grey area because the bodies, they didn't really belong to anyone. So if they didn't steal any items of clothing, technically it wasn't really robbery. So they had more to fear from the public than from the law. Anyway, the church here, the most famous person, or my favorite person being buried inside, it is Captain John Smith. If you followed my tours in Kent, you probably know about Captain John Smith. If you don't remember John Smith, let me show you. This is Captain John Smith from the Pocahontas movie. He is the British Navy officer that allegedly was captured by the Powhatan and saved by Pocahontas and all that. He's buried in the church there. He's giving a biscuit to Miko. Those biscuits from the Navy, apparently they were absolutely disgusting. There's a little story. You know, after the Great Fire of London of 1666, a lot of people found themselves homeless because their homes had burned to the Great Fire. So there was a great effort of charity to help those homelesses. People gave them whatever they could, and the Navy donated a lot of those biscuits. And apparently they were so disgusting that the homelesses, they gave them back to the Navy. They were like, no, thank you, that's disgusting. So you might remember in the Pocahontas movie, Miko, the raccoon, doesn't actually like the biscuits. It's because they're not very good. Anyway, I promised you a place with some real ghosts. Let me show you one of the most haunted pubs in London. This is the Viaduct Tavern. They have quite a few ghost stories. It is a beautiful pub. It is a former gin palace. It is mainly allegedly haunted because of their basement. They claim, it's very much debatable, a lot of historians completely disagree, but no bugs in the biscuits, Lynn. I think it's just because they were meant to preserve for very, very long, and to, they were packing as much as they could in those biscuits in case the sailors were at sea for a long time. So they were just not nice. They were not meant to be nice. They were meant to be for survival, really. Anyway, the pub, it's beautiful. Apparently, they claim that one of their basement cellars was a former prison cell from Newgate Prison across the street. It's very probably untrue, but the cellar, they're very creepy, so it's easy to believe. One of the paintings they have inside actually has a bullet hole from a bullet that was shot. So very cool pub to visit if you ever come to London. And the ghost story really came out because of the landlord in the 80s. Apparently, a lot of the staff, they didn't want to go into the basement. They didn't want to go to get the beers because they were scared, as simple as that. And apparently one day, the landlord had to go downstairs himself to get the beer. And apparently the door slammed behind him, and he heard a voice that said, "It's only the two of us down here now." So quite creepy. They have had a lot of paranormal investigators going into the basement to record the noise. And to be fair, they did actually record a lot of noises, but there's a little underground water stream, so the water could create some of the noises. Apparently, there was also a story when the landlady was upstairs reading the newspaper, and the paper was snapped away from her hands. So yeah, it's probably haunted. It is a beautiful place because it used to be a gin palace. To tell you a bit more about the history of gin, you might have noticed we drink a lot of gin in the UK. That is because in the very late 1600s, we had a king, William of Orange. He was a Protestant, he was anti-Catholics. He actually placed a tax on all the goods that came from the Catholic countries. So bye-bye French wine, hello gin. Because gin was from the Netherlands, it was a good Protestant drink. And at the time, gin was not taxed. So it became the drinks of the poor. A lot of poor, especially ladies, were completely addicted to gin. You might have heard of the Hogarth's engraving, Beer Street and Gin Alley, or the other way around, I never know. But yeah, so at that point, gin was the drink of the poor. The story that really sealed the bad reputation of gin, it is the story of Judith Dufour. Judith Dufour, she's got a very French name because she was the daughter of a French Huguenot in Smithfield. And she was very poor. Her kids had been given to the workhouses, and eventually one day she was drinking with her mate. When she got out of money, no more gin. She went back to the workhouse to collect her little toddler. At the workhouse, they had given the toddler a new petticoat and a little outfit. She reclaimed her baby. She took the baby. She stripped her baby naked. She strangled her own baby. She ditched the poor little dead girl in a pit, in a ditch. And then she went to a second-hand shop to sell the little petticoat for 16 pence. It's hard to translate 16 pence in the 1700s, but we're talking about less than $25 in today's money. All of that to buy more gin. So that's, when we say Mother's ruin, it's because of stories like that. So very, very sad, really, that anyone could get that addicted. Yes, Lynn, exactly. Some of the Jack the Ripper victims were very much addicted to gin as well. Although in Victorian times, gin had started to regain a bit of a reputation because they gave it to the army, you know, to go to India and stuff, to do gin and tonic against the mosquitoes, you know, and that's when they started to open those gin palaces. But yeah, it was still very much an addictive drink. Anyway, today this is the Old Bailey, where some of the worst criminals are being judged. But back in the day, that was the site of Newgate Prison. A lot of the executions at the time, they were happening at the Tyburn. Smithfield was a site of execution, but before that, Newgate was the main prison in London for about 700 years, really. But when the executions happened at the Tyburn, what they did is they came to pick up the prisoners from Newgate here. They placed them on a cart to take them down to the Tyburn. So they would live on a cart over here. The streets would be packed with people throwing feces at them or blowing kisses, depending on the crime and depending on the criminal. Then the cart would take a left over here. They'll go down Oxford Street and all that. At the time, Oxford Street was known as Tyburn Road, because that was the road to the Tyburn. They'll stop in a pub, so the criminals could have a last drink, a last one for the road. That's how we got the expression. Then the guy driving the cart, he wasn't drinking. He was on a wagon. That could be how we got the expression as well. That one is debatable. And then they went down to the Tyburn, when again it was a huge party. That was that you could hang as many as 3 at the very same time. And because it was too much of a party, it felt like a festival. You had thousands of people coming to watch. They decided in the 1800s to do it differently. They decided to do it right here at 8 a.m. in the morning in front of the prisons. So they imagined it would attract less people, but that didn't really work. People came the night before to have the best view. The pub here, it was a different pub at the time, but the Magpie on Stump there, they had a balcony and they did execution breakfast. Yeah, exactly. It was the quinine in the tonic that's against mosquito, so you don't get dengue and all that. But quinine is not very good for your retinas. I know, because I've got terrible retinas, and when I was a child, my parents wanted to move to Senegal, but I would have had to take quinine, and that's not good for people with fragile retinas like myself. Anyway, so when they decided to do those executions in the morning, it was right here where the fontaine stands today. Still very busy though. We talked about the Burkers earlier. They were hanged in here. 40,000 people came. Sarah Metyard as well, the one we mentioned earlier as well. So lots of criminals were hanged in here. Some people were strongly against it, like Charles Dickens, for example. He believed, although he had come to witness many of those executions, he strongly believed it brought no good to society. He was actually against those public executions. The last public execution in the country was in 1868. After that, it was inside of the prison. Well, although some of the prisons, they had a balcony sometimes, so they could do it on top of the balcony, so people could still have a little bit of a view. Yes, exactly, Dessa. I'm not talking about this type of events on YouTube because that's getting me demonetized. I cannot say the T words, so I never mention those stories anymore, because then it's some of the key terms that the YouTube algorithms do not like. But talking about Newgate Prison, there are a few interesting characters that have been locked in there. The worst serial killer ever that was locked in at Newgate and executed at Newgate It's a lady called Amelia Dyer. Amelia Dyer, some of you might remember, she was the worst Victorian serial killer. I know when I say that, some of you might think about Jack the Ripper. No, Amelia was worse. Although some might argue that Amelia was Jack the Ripper. It's a bit far-fetched, but why not? We don't know who Jack the Ripper was. Amelia was a baby farmer. We talked about baby farming in some of my tours before. What happened is, when you were... my bicycle is still here, that's a good sign. When you see my bicycle, we're coming towards the end of the tour. So yeah, Amelia was a baby farmer. At the time, if you were a young lady, or even not that young, if you fell pregnant out of wedlocks, your life was ended, almost. Your prospect of careers were gone, your prospect of marriage were gone, your parents might even disheritate you. You were finished. So some ladies sometimes try to find a way to get rid of the babies or to get someone to take care of them. Those baby farmers, they were taking the babies away. Sometimes they were meant to give them for adoptions in farms, where they needed more kids for labor. I know. And sometimes it was a one-off payment. They'll take the baby away for a large fee, and that was it. And sometimes it was a weekly or monthly fee. And the trade was terribly regulated. And ladies like Amelia Dyer, that's how they made it a business. Thanks ever so much, Pauline. That's very, very much appreciated. Amelia, at first she actually did take care of a few babies, but then she realized it was cheaper to kill them instead. The first few, she actually starved them, or sometimes they would give them gin. That would be pretty much the same symptoms as starvation. Thanks, Mark. That's very much appreciated. Thanks, everyone, for your little tips. If any of you dropped me a little tip on PayPal or buy me a coffee, it's very much appreciated as well. I cannot thank you live because I don't see them live, but make sure you know I'm very grateful. Grateful, not graceful. I'm very graceful as well. Who knows? Anyway, back to Amelia. She got caught eventually because she dumped a baby, and on the packages she had used the package with her address. I do want to take you to Reading one day to tell you the full story, but I'll probably wait until October. And it's a bit expensive. It's 26 quid minimum to get the train to Reading. But one day we'll go there. Anyway, so she was the worst criminal, according to me, that was hanged in Newgate. And apparently she's haunting the building still. There's the hangman, the one that hanged her, inside. So there was no more public executions at the time. Apparently, before to be hanged, she said to him, "You'll see me again." And apparently the very day the prison closed, he saw her face, her ghostly face coming back. So she was indeed back. I'll just keep walking so we can finish on a nice shot of St. Paul's Cathedral. Now, one other amazing lady that spent some time into Newgate Prison, it is Elizabeth Fry. Let me show you Elizabeth. I'm sure most of you have seen her face. Well, at least if you've been in the country. She was on the £5 note, so that's the old one from like 10 years ago. Elizabeth Fry, she was actually a Quaker. The Quakers, they're always involved in good things, I think, like abolitionists and stuff like that. So they were interesting people, the Quakers. She was shocked by the conditions of the prisons. She was actually against the death penalty, and she wanted to help those ladies in prison to rehabilitate them, for when they'll come out, if they did come out one day. So the other picture on the left hand side, it's her reading to the ladies. So she actually came and spent some time in the prison. So she would read to the ladies, she would bring them some fabric. She also cared about the ladies that were being deported, you know, to Australia and all that, because very often they were sent with nothing. So as they arrived in Australia, they would end up in the sex trade. So she was fighting against that. And what she started to do is to give those ladies some sewing materials, some fabric and all that. So as they were on board of the ship, they could produce some items of clothing, and as they got to Australia, they could sell them. So they would have a start, a beginning of something, a beginning of a career. So very, very interesting lady. And she decided to come and stay at Newgate. I mean, you know, it's amazing. You don't hear about anyone else that would place themselves into prison. But yeah, she was... she wanted to help those ladies. She strongly believed that they had to be rehabilitated. That's still a big debate today. You know, do we want prisons to be punishment only, or do we want to rehabilitate people so they can have a glimpse of for, you know, normal life when they come out? She's a bit to me she's a bit like what's her name? The Duke of Westminster sisters. Oh, Lady Edwina. She, you know, the lady that created the prison restaurants and all that. The Duke of Westminster sister, Lady Edwina, although she was born in huge wealth. I mean, it's one of the richest families in the world. She decided to spend her life helping the outcast of society, and she trained those prisoners into opening restaurants and cooking and all that. So they're ready to start a career when they come out. Anyway, this is St. Paul's Cathedral. Let me show you a nice little view of Queen Anne. Queen Anne, this is the monarch that is known for having 17 pregnancies, no babies that survived, sadly. She's also the one that, they didn't survive long enough to be the heir. She's also the one that might have had a couple of lesbian relationships. The most famous one would be Sarah Churchill, the Duchess of Marlborough, one of the ancestors of Winston Churchill. You might have seen the movie The Favourite. It's the story of Queen Anne and Sarah Churchill. Good evening, Lee. Right, guys, that's gonna be the end of the tour. Let me flip this camera around to show you my face again. And let me know in the chat if you have any questions about anything before we go. If you wanted to see a bit more of me, yes, exactly, she was played by Olivia Colman on The Favourites. Cool movie, quite. It's a comedy as well, so it's quite nice. Thanks, Pam. That's very much appreciated. If you want to see a bit more of me, next Tuesday we're going back to Ladywell and Brockley Cemetery. We've not done this one since the time of Hago, so it's been at least 2.5 years we've not been there. It's about time we go. And after that, I've not scheduled much yet, but we've got to go back to the South Bank. So we've got to go back to talk about the Lambeth poisoner, Thomas Neil Cream, and also the Southwark poisoner, George Chapman. So I'll be doing some scheduling in the next few days or so. So expect some evening tours. I'm gonna try, apart from next Monday, next Tuesday, I'm gonna try not to schedule too much in the afternoon, because I don't want my my gimbal to overheat again. I'm probably gonna have to buy a new one anyway, because I don't think the other one is gonna come back to life. This one is okay-ish, but I can't do any funny filming because the last axe is actually broken. So yeah. Thanks everyone for coming today. It's always a pleasure to have so many of you along. Thanks, Tanya. Thanks, Sanson. If any of you were completely new to me, make sure you subscribe if you want to make sure you don't miss out on the live next time, because they're very easy to miss, those lives. I know a lot of people watch them later on, and that's fine, but it's more fun to be there live and be able to interact in the chat. So you might want to consider subscribing. Some of you are actually watching me quite regularly and are not subscribed. I can tell from the analytics. So do make sure you subscribe. It does help, so you get more of my tours on your feed as you open YouTube, and also it makes my channel look a bit better. So do make sure you subscribe, and hopefully I'll see some of you next Tuesday. If not, I'll see you in the next few weeks. We've got to do some more dark tours after at night, and hopefully I'll see you soon. Have a great morning, a great evening, whatever time it is for you, wherever you are in the world. And if any of you dropped me a little tip on any other platform like Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal, thanks very much in advance. Right, bye for now. Have a good one.
Since we've been chiming in on sport, we've just heard it say sleeve up. No.